And so her strength comes from the fact that she embodies what is good and right, and it emanates out from her. And so people naturally want to lead her. They naturally want to follow her. They naturally want to listen to what she has to say.
Mm.
And she has credibility, right? She has credibility. It's economic and diplomatic power. It's the power of people having seen you stay above the fray and act with reason and grace and accountability in challenging situations. And so now, because of that reputation, when they look around a room and there's a problem, they look to you to see what you're doing. And they say,
Yeah.
I'm going to go with her. I'm going to follow her because I know that she has her act together.
I think the first time I ever embodied this energy for real was when my stepdad had a stroke and I had to
Mm.
go drive them to the hospital, the ER, and kind of just hold space for people that night and well, actually the next month and take on unexpected work and watch my mom's dogs and just it's like showing up for people in that kind of way.
And you had to be the rock that they could rely on. You couldn't fall apart because somebody needed to keep it together.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so many women in our society are caretakers, caretaking, and that type of emotional labor falls disproportionately on women in our society. There have been studies about this.
Mm.
And so it goes back to that idea of this feminine concept of what strength is. It's that need to be the emotional rock and that source of fortitude and not just to do the physical labor, but the emotional labor on
Mm.
behalf of your community. And
Mm.
that you're the one people are looking to for stability and for calm and for uh, the calm in the storm, I guess.
And that's why we have the pressure valve of the lion's mouth, because those of us who are taking all that on, we have to have a release.
I'd also say it's a pulling, attracting energy rather than a pushing energy. You don't have to go to people and tell them what to do. They come to you seeking your
Yes.
advice on what to do.
Yeah, absolutely.
Welcome to Tales from the Tarot podcast, where you can learn about the tarot not from a book, but from people's lives. I'm your host, Tara, and I invite you to join me and my guests as we break down the human experience through story, myth, and archetypes. Emily is a law school graduate and serious tarot practitioner living in DC. She's been reading tarot for over 13 years and is a founding member of the Capital Tarot Society, where she serves as a tarot educator. Emily believes in using tarot cards as a mindfulness, meditation, and self-empowerment tool, and finds that it helps her clients engage in thoughtful decision-making that enables them to take control of their own destiny. I hope you enjoy this episode and our conversation on the Strength card.
I was given my first tarot deck in high school, but I didn't take it very seriously. I didn't. So, I mean, I would pull it out and try to read with it, not very well, not in a very well-informed way, and not consistently. And so I guess you would say that in seriousness, I started reading tarot in 2010 because I moved to the DC area. I had this tarot deck that my friend had given me, and it just so happened that one of the roommates I was living with came from a long line of tarot readers. And
Oh.
I was like, oh, well, I have a tarot deck. So I asked her to teach me. We sat down and did it a few times. She said, you're pretty good at this. You have potential. You should take it more seriously. So I went and I found a local tarot society um, and started attending those meetings every month pretty consistently. And that's really how I developed and grew my practice. So in that way, I have been reading for 13 years.
Beautiful. Is the DC area pretty friendly? I mean, is there good community there for tarot readers, or do you feel like you have enough community?
Not really. I don't want to say that DC is closed off to it because people in DC are fairly accepting and progressive. So it's not like, you tell somebody you're a tarot reader and you immediately feel shunned, but it's more that DC, and this isn't just true for tarot, I think this is true for a lot of personalities and lifestyles and hobbies. It's the kind of environment where people here are very, very focused on their career, very, very focused on their mission. And it's also very transient. People come here for a political cycle or to do the job that they came to do, move up the ladder, and then they leave and they go back home. It's changing a little bit. And there is a long-standing community that has been here for decades and decades. But, you know, there's also this layer of transience on top of that a lot of people, when you think of DC people, that's what we're talking about. And it makes it hard to establish community. It makes it hard for independent businesses to take root. It's also one of the most expensive cities in the country, after New York and San Francisco. And so independent business does not thrive here like it does in some areas because of the cost of real estate, and people do tend to be very buttoned up and stuffy. When you get to know them deep down, they're really interesting, but on their surface, people are not wearing the stuff out in the open. Whereas you go to a place like Tucson or a place like Sedona or even New York or San Francisco or LA or name any number of other places, Austin, right? People have it out front and center. Or New Orleans, right? You can see, you can find it if you can't spit without hitting something of the psychic or paranormal or otherworldly nature. Or in Sedona, everything is energy work everywhere, right? In DC, it's law firms, lobbying firms, news outlets, NGOs, political people, government workers, and that's what people talk about. You're talking politics. So even if you're not in it, that's all you talk about because that's what's around you.
Well, you must be there to like balance the energy out somehow.
It's a very interesting place to read tarot because that's my clientele. That's my clientele. So it's a very different kind of tarot vibe and a very different kind of person who goes to seek a tarot reading. When I was doing tarot online, I was getting all kinds of like romantic questions and family questions and interpersonal questions, whereas in DC, it's all career, education. I want to start my own nonprofit. Am I ready? Those kinds of questions. And it's really interesting to make that cultural comparison.
That is interesting.
Mm-hmm.
I brought with me 3 different tarot cards just for fun. I just think it's really cool to look at the different imagery. And I'm sure you've seen all these, but just for anybody who's listening, who's new to the tarot, I've got the Rider-Waite version, which shows a more virginal version of her. She's wearing a white dress, and it's a woman in a white dress taming a lion, and it looks like she's out in a field, and she looks very virginal, I would say. And then we have the Marseilles, where she looks kind of like a member of the royal court. And she has really bright colors on, but still taming the lion or wrestling with it. And then you get into the Thoth or the Thoth deck, and you see her riding the lion, naked and wild. And this one's called Lust. So I just love that. I'm totally like fascinated with this one. What's your favorite thing about the Strength card?
So for me, and I'm going to be going off of the traditional Rider-Waite-Smith imagery here.
Okay.
I've always been really drawn to the Strength card because of its feminism. So, whether or not you consider the female figure to be virginal, it's a really interesting take on what it means to embody strength, right? Because there are different types of strength. There's brute force strength, and then there's the force of your own will. There's strength of personality, there's strength of character, and there's something that, if you've ever taken political science, is known as soft power. So there's hard power, which stands for brute force and military might, and really exerting your will and forcing things to happen. And then there's soft power, which is diplomatic power or economic power. And in fact, if you've ever taken French, they also have this concept because there are 2 different French words for power. There's pouvoir, which is that brute force again, and then there's puissance, which is the power of persuasion. And so it speaks to all the different ways that a person can be strong, which include leading by example, the strength of your reputation, people wanting to follow you because they respect you. It's the ability to persuade and to be very much in control, a very powerful person without having to exert force over them. And we see that embodied in the Strength card here because that lion could very easily eat that lady.
Yeah.
Very easily overpower her. I don't even like to think of it as she's taming the lion. I think she's gently coaxing the lion. And the lion's letting her do it, and he trusts her and he loves her. He admires her. They have rapport. She's taken the time to build a relationship. and to gain his respect so that he'll let her do that. So it stands for this much more gentle, soft, feminine, concept of what strength might look like. And if you look at very old versions of the tarot, when the tarot was first being illustrated before the Rider-Waite-Smith came out, the oldest versions actually show a man beating a lion with a club.
Yes.
So somewhere along the line, that concept shifted. And I actually don't know that much about the history of when that shift occurred, but it appears to be pretty early on in the history of tarot. And then Pamela Coleman Smith, in illustrating the Rider-Waite-Smith, really, I think, embodied that concept very, very well in her illustration. And I think that's partly why we see the virginal figure with the white pure gown and the garland of flowers around her head and the bright, cheerful yellow background, because I think that these are all things that speak to virtue and kindness. And we could have a whole other podcast on how society codes virginity and values virginity, etc. But
Yeah.
At the time that she was creating, which was around the turn of the 20th century, virginity was associated in a lot of ways with purity and good and kindness and with femininity, and as itself a source of feminine power. So it's really interesting, because I think at first glance, when you look at the tarot, and particularly at more traditional ones, and particularly at the Rider-Waite-Smith, on first glance, you see something that seems very retrograde in terms of its treatment of gender. You see gender norms embodied throughout, men representing the masculine, women representing the feminine. You don't have a lot of non-binary figures except for the Fool. So they're a little ahead of their time there. And you see people embodying traditional gender roles. But when you look at them like archetypes, and when you see these people as stand-ins, and when you look at the tarot as basically leveraging vernacular associations and common associations in society to translate more esoteric concepts in a way that can be accessible, you start to realize that it's a deck that values femininity equally with masculinity in a society where masculinity is seen as better, more valuable, as more normative than femininity. So the fact that you have an even balance of feminine and masculine in the tarot, male figures, female figures, and that something like strength can be embodied as a woman is really intriguing, very much ahead of its time. We still live in a society today in the 21st century where masculinity is considered normative. Women are equal as long as we aspire to hold ourselves to a male standard. So this notion that strength is a feminine virtue, it's really, really digging in a very forward-thinking way, I think, to concepts that continue to be relevant today in modern strains of feminism.
I totally agree. I think that we're only at the beginning of it too. Like you said, how they just switched the man beating the lion to this within the last I don't know, however many 100 years. Like, I think that we're just still in the beginning stages of that feminine power evolving and us even learning what it is.
In that way, it's kind of a microcosm of the tarot itself, because tarot and witchcraft and introspection and divination have historically always been coded as feminine, and oftentimes derided, right? They used to burn witches for doing those kinds of things. And these types of activities, these inward-looking activities, these more passive forms of exerting strength or power they're coded as feminine, and oftentimes they're seen as dangerous, right? So strength in its own way is kind of a microcosm for the entire practice of tarot.
That's brilliant. I love that. Why do you think that the feminine power is seen as dangerous, or like the going within, or whatever that is? Why do you think that it's seen as dangerous?
Oh, I think there are so many ways to address that. I mean, we've lived in a society that has historically feared women's power, right? We live in a society where Christianity is normative, and Christianity has always held the man out to be the head of the household, the controller, the keeper of the power, and women were meant to be obedient and subservient, right? Men were kings, men were popes, women were consistently excluded, even when there is a history of women playing those kinds of roles that people don't like to talk about. It's said that there was a sacred masculine and a sacred feminine, and the Virgin Mary represented the sacred feminine, but as Christianity evolved, she got kind of relegated into this mother status and was removed from the Holy Trinity, whereas in reality, in ancient times, she would have been elevated to the same status as God, right? So,
which is really what this card, it could be really deep to go into that, but like this card, I'm still learning, but I learned today that this card is actually Babylon, who is a goddess who is known to like accept everything. She's like the mother that just takes on everything of everybody. She doesn't turn anybody away. And she's, some people call her like the divine whore, but she's also like a mother figure. And it's really interesting that, you know, the lust card and
Well, that's really interesting too. The virgin whore dichotomy or the mother whore dichotomy that we see, you know, time and time again in Western thought. I've always kind of not been as in favor of the way the Thoth card depicts it, because I feel like it's taking this really beautiful concept that, as Judeo-Christian as it may be and as retrograde as it may be, is very much valuing something that I think is meaningful and remains relevant, and turning it on its head. And you know, the Thoth deck is very much a rejection of Rider-Waite-Smith and some of the more stodgy values it represents, right? And Aleister Crowley was doing that very consciously, but that was one that I didn't think needed to be corrected. And so I've always been a little bit resentful, if that's the right word. That might be too strong a word, of the Thoth in a lot of ways, in that card in particular. But now that you put it that way, if that's what he's referring to, maybe I need to go back and give it a second look.
yeah, like it's crazy. Even these, if you look real close, these in the gray space underneath here, these are saints. They're saints that are gray. I mean, just look at it sometime when you have your deck. There's saints under there that like gave up their blood and all their power to Babylon, to her, and then they gave her their blood and this holy grail, and she's just like taking it all. Like, I don't know. Cool. This stuff is crazy. But so let's get into the 5 questions that so normally I ask everybody 5 questions. So let's go. So what would you say is like the big main thing that draws you to this card, if you had to just choose like one thing about it, keyword or something, a theme?
Well, again, I mean, I think it's
feminism
the behind the card, but if I were going to really distill that down into a really simple concept, I think it would be the need to take a softer, more feminine approach to the way that we resolve conflict.
Okay, cool. And if you had to describe it as an archetype, like a living energy that you would act out in your life, what would that energy be?
Restraint. I think it would be restraint, which is an interesting thing to connect with strength. But again, it's strength of character, it's strength of perseverance, it's grace under fire, it's that kind of strength. And it's more than anything being in control of yourself, because you can't be a leader, you can't be powerful, you can't have that kind of strength in the world if you don't first have control over your own emotions and actions.
Mm-hmm. And do you have an example of your own life where you've shown that kind of restraint, or like where you had to learn that? Or
how many hours you got? I think we all have to do this all day, every day, quite frankly. So, I mean, it shows up. I can give you big examples, but I think more interesting is how it shows up in little ways. So every time I'm on the phone with Comcast because they messed up my billing and I've gotten the runaround and I'm now talking to the 5th customer service representative, and what I really want to do is scream and berate this person, but I hold back because I know that that one person isn't really responsible. That's strength. Or like the lion, I have a very pesky, poorly behaved cat who gets into trouble, and whenever, you know, he does something wrong and he doesn't understand that it's not okay, because he just doesn't understand, he bites me because he's playing and he doesn't realize it hurts. My choice to gently nudge him away, or to gently say no, or, you know, when he's on the counter for the umpteenth time, to pick him up and gently put him down and just say, no, we're not doing that, rather than yelling at him, spanking him, knocking him off the counter, you know, or just picking him up and putting him down very abruptly and getting very frustrated with him. That's a type of strength. And that goes to that maternal instinct there too. But I mean, you can see it in presidential politics and in world politics, right? Like what Vladimir Putin is doing right now in Ukraine, that is a traditional brute force masculine form of strength. That is not the strength that is embodied in this card. Whereas Volodymyr Zelensky, the way he is leading his people through his strength of character and through, you know, his dedication and his tending to the psychological and emotional needs of his people, and, you know, really leading by example and putting himself on the line when he could have run away and he could be more of an instigator. that to me is the strength embodied in this card.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. I think you nailed it with that cat example. That was perfect. That was like I totally knew what you meant when you said that, because there's been times when I had animals around and it takes, it's so subtle, and you can do it in just a few seconds where you can make that choice to not like freak out and lose control. If this archetype, if the strength, let's say the woman on the strength card was a person, you know what? Actually, we have two archetypes. We have the lion and the woman.
Oh,
So you could just say either one of those were a person. What advice would they give you?
I'll stick with the human because that one's a little easier. I mean, obviously, I think it really depends on the situation and who she's advising, because I think when you compare her to the cast of characters in the tarot, of anybody, she is going to be the most thoughtful, the most considered, or at least among the more thoughtful, considered people in the tarot, right? Whereas the devil would just start running his mouth, right?
Yeah.
This or any number of the knights, right? So some of the swords people. But I think she would be very considered, and she would want to make sure she fully understands the situation. Again, it's that restraint, it's that holding back and making sure that you have a full understanding of the picture in order to exercise that persuasion and soft power. So you need to understand, you need to kind of understand how the other person ticks. So I think first and foremost, she'd do a really good job of asking good questions and figuring out what the crux of the problem is in order to then advise in a way that comes from a place of authority and soundness, so that her words actually fall in a way that people respond to them. So as an example, I think, for instance, if somebody were really trying to get a promotion at work, or they were really trying to lead a project at work, and they were struggling, and they came to her and said, this is my approach. I've been, really going to people and pushing them, and I've been letting people know what the consequences are if they don't complete their projects on time. I think she would say, that might not be the right approach. The approach you might want to take is one of collaboration, and one where you show them how hard you're working, and you work harder than anybody around you, and let them see you doing that, and you take the time to teach them, and you take the time to demonstrate concretely why it is that they benefit from going along with the plan. You're going to get a lot more flies with honey than with vinegar. And by leading through your own virtue.
Yeah. Ooh, I like that. Yeah. Well said. The last question is, how do you feel about the zodiac associated with this card, which is Leo?
That's really interesting, because I've never felt a Leo vibe from this card.
Really?
Really, but it goes back to what you're saying about the fact that there are really two archetypes here. There's two beings, right? There's the lady and the lion is very clearly Leo, but I've never gotten the Leo vibe from the lady. But there are a lot of elements in this card that are very Leo. Like, again, you have this bright yellow background, which is what Pamela Coleman Smith used to use to represent being outdoors in the daytime, in the sunshine. It's a positive card. There's lots of sun energy. If we kick it over to the sun, number 19, and we look at what the sun represents, it's not just positive outcomes, but it's the benefits of honesty and transparency and clarity, right? Which is what creates the positive outcomes, as opposed to the half information of the moon, or the minor inspiration, just the tiny speck of inspiration and hope in the star, right? It's all the light you need to see everything clearly. That's a very Leo energy, totally. Right? That sunshine. So I think maybe where the Leo energy, and for those not as familiar with astrology, I guess I should say Leo is very outgoing. It is fire. It is a masculine energy. It can be very forceful. It is the center of attention. It is a very strong leader energy. Leos are very, very heavy CEO vibes. So in that respect, the fact that she has the ability to exert power and control, I guess that does go along with Leo. But to me, it's almost like the scene and the overall concept of the card and the overall message of the card might be very Leo, but the figure, the woman on the card, I don't think her zodiac is Leo. I think she's more of a Cancer, maybe a Virgo.
Yeah, especially in the Rider-Waite-Smith. Maybe in the Thoth, she's more of a
She's
Leo.
a Leo. She's, she's here. She has arrived, right? She
Yeah.
left no crumbs. So I think in thought, yeah, she's definitely a Leo.
I think one of my favorite meanings of the strength card, or I guess interpretations that I heard, was that it's all about the power of the human voice, and it's the power to unleash our voice, or like you said, restrain it, hold it back. But I thought it was interesting how you can actually point to the lion's mouth on here and read it as symbolically as the voice. And if you have a client, you can help them with if they feel like they're truly expressing themselves fully, or if they feel repressed in their voice. And that to me feels Leo, kind of like that Leo, because a lot of Leos are entertainers, or they're able to express their creativity really on stages or whatnot really well. And I always like that one.
Well, I think that's very Mercury in Leo,
Mm-hmm.
right? That's like if somebody has Mercury in Leo in their chart, you're going to find more often than not that they're in some type of vocation where or hobby where they are communicating quite a bit, or
Yeah.
have opportunities to be vocal, to be the center of attention. I hadn't heard that though about the voice thing, so I'll have to look into that.
Yeah, usually what they say it's voice and sex with this card. It's the voice and the sex, and depending on where the person is focused, one will be depleted and the other one will be more, but it's about balancing them. So it's just another way to read it. Like the lion's mouth is how we unleash that energy or control it.
It's interesting because in yoga there's something called lion's breath,
Mhm.
and you open your mouth and you do these deep, very H sounding, very, very audible breaths. And the purpose of doing lion's breath is to actually cool down the body after a sequence of poses that generate a lot of body heat. And so it's really interesting. It's almost like letting out the steam.
Yeah, totally. So, oh, you want to see something really cool about the Marseille tarot card? Do you know what these, do you see these?
The little pointy red things on the
So if
top of
you,
it.
yes. So
Okay.
if you could guess what they are, what would you guess?
I would assume that those are just hat trim, badly illustrated hat trim. I'm not a creative
That's what
when it comes to
I thought.
visuals.
That's totally what I thought too. But then I learned they're actually the lion's teeth. She's picking them out and like boom, like putting them in her hat to show that she's a hero.
And the lion's just letting her do it.
Well, I don't know. That's just what it said in one of my books. I thought it was cool. Maybe maybe hopefully she's not hurting him. Hopefully it's
Well, given my interpretation of the strength card, and this is why I like Rider-Waite-Smith, but given my interpretation of the strength card, I'm going to interpret that to mean that she's helping the lion because he had a toothache and his teeth were rotting and he needed them removed. And part of the reason he's letting her open his mouth, even though he's this big, strong lion and she's this human lady who can't overpower him, is because he knows she's helping it.
yes. I
And
like
and she's popping them in her hat because she needs a place to put them. That's my interpretation of the strength card based on at least my Rider-Waite interpretation.
I really like what you said too about, I mean, I can resonate with what you said about the gender aspect of the tarot. How I love how archetypes, I always say that they're genderless. They don't have gender because I do like the words masculine and feminine because they're natural. It's part of nature and they're forces of nature that are easy for me to identify with. But you can have a man being the empress, or you can have a woman being the emperor. Like, and that's why I like the tarot archetypes, because they transcend, I'll say they transcend gender.
Mhm. Absolutely. And I mean that again, that's part of what makes it very forward thinking. And it's just really important to approach the Rider-Waite-Smith because it is older and because today it's probably not how you would make a tarot deck. But it's also this really foundational deck on which every other tarot deck since has either been based or in reaction to, right? Everything's either a reinterpretation of or a rejection of Rider-Waite-Smith.
Right.
And that's why it's really important to come at it and to see how it fits in our modern structure. And one of the things I like about it, one of the ways in which it's very forward thinking, is that 100 years ago, they were already thinking about this concept that a man can embody both femininity and masculinity.
Wow.
And a woman can embody both masculinity and femininity. And they were simply using assigned male and assigned female bodies as symbols of that because that was accessible.
Right. Symbols. That's what I was going to say. It's just all symbolism.
Right. We wouldn't necessarily do that today, right? We would come up with some other way of explaining this is on the feminine end of the energy spectrum and this is the masculine end of the energy spectrum. For people for whom masculine, feminine terminology is a turnoff, I always recommend substituting yin and yang.
Yeah.
It's not exactly identical because we're talking Eastern and Western, but it's a close enough concept that I think if you can replace feminine with yin and masculine with yang,
Totally.
if that's more accessible or more comfortable to you. I like the concept of masculinity and femininity because I think it's something that we can play with in our culture, and it's something that it gives us a tool for deconstructing some of the historical and potentially erroneous gender conforming conditioning that we've been given and some of the discrimination that people have seen for a variety of reasons having to do with gender or gender expression. And so I like the idea that there's this concept of masculinity and femininity rather, and that anybody can embody both, and that your balance might be different depending on who you are.
Yeah.
And that, we just traditionally associate one with a certain sex and the other with a different sex. Mm-hmm. I just think it gives us a tool, right? Whereas boiling it down to yin and yang kind of takes that part of the conversation out of it. But if that's what you're looking for, that is also available.
Yeah, yin and yang are more about the energetics. Okay, so here's another one is we have an animal on this card. And that's another big energy here, which is, primal animal. Like it makes me think of our shadow, our emotions, like the stuff that we try to repress, like our inner wild really shows up on this card.
Well, I mean, that's a great observation. That goes back to what we were saying about how this card is really about inner strength, and it's about self-control. It's about having control over yourself. It's about being a strong person and being able to resist urges that are harmful, urges that are problematic. And I don't want to get judgy or moralistic here, because I'm also, my other favorite card, you had asked me when we were deciding what card to do, what my favorite cards were. I said, well, strength and the devil. My other favorite card is the devil, which is basically just let loose to whatever you want, right?
Cool.
Follow those inner urges, do what you want with those urges. It's not the bad devil. It's not the I'm here to do evil devil. It's a little cartoon devil on your shoulder that's telling you to go ahead and do the thing that you want to do that bad thing you've been thinking about, right? Go to Vegas.
Yeah.
Have the stand, right? So I don't want to put this in kind of a moralistic frame insofar as, self-restraint, kind of like temperance or the hangman means she never sins, or she never does the things that people in medieval Europe, when the tarot was being developed, would have thought of as a sin. She's not the anti-devil, right? She's not on a dichotomy with the devil. It's the things that we know are harmful, right? She's not somebody who hurts other people. She's somebody who thinks before she acts. She's somebody who might have a one-night stand. Or rather, to her, that's not even what it is. She's somebody who's going to restrain herself from judging other people for having the one-night stand, right? She's somebody who, she keeps her cool in a challenging situation. She leads by example. She's not a hypocrite. That's what I mean when I say that she's virtuous, that she's in control of herself, that she has strength of character, right? It's not, holier than thou, nose up in the air kind of virtue that we're talking about here. And in fact, I would argue that some of that judgment that comes in there is actually a sign of weakness, right? Not a sign of strength. She has the strength to not need to judge other people on that level.
Woo, that is really well said, Emily. Woo, you just nailed that. Anything else you want to say about the strength card that's like, I don't know, anything that you're embodying with it?
Well, I think I would say that if you're the kind of person who does like a daily meditation or affirmation, or you would draw a card a day for yourself, this kind of gets back at the question you asked earlier about what kind of advice would she have for you. But this is a very specific type of context where this is the card that you get for yourself as just an energy to focus on, or a lesson that you're supposed to be learning for the day or for the week or for whatever the time span of that card is for you. Like if this were an affirmation, I think key words to really think about include perseverance, grace, grace insofar as we mean it as giving other people grace or grace under pressure, dignity, reputation management, crisis management, right? Leadership. To me, this is a big leader energy. This is somebody who has power and strength through her leadership, but she leads in a very gentle, quiet, stoic, calm, non-egotistical kind of way.
I love what you said about her not being holier than thou or judging anybody, but she just does it from her virtue, but not in like a snobby virtue or like I'm better than you virtue, but like it is the truth of who she is or something.
Yeah, she's the real deal.